Hey everybody, welcome to Fit Tip Tuesday. Today I'm going to show you how to fit the edge of a neckline that came out of some binding on a ready-to-wear blouse. I actually picked this project up during Father's Day at my sister's house. This is my sister's Mac Studio Georgette blouse, and you can see here what happened is the fabric came out of the edge or out of the binding that finishes the edge of the neckline. So of course my sister said that she was going to get some sticky tape and just tape it back together, but I told her I thought we could do it just a little bit better. So let me show you how to handle something like this. Now we've got a few things going on here that we have to reinforce before we can sew it back together. The first thing I did was take out the stitching in the binding. So you can see here, if I open it up, this is just a ½ inch, well, it's an inch. The edges are folded into the center, making it a ½ inch, and then when it's closed, it's a ¼ inch. So it's really small. There's not a lot of wiggle room to get that fabric back in there. You can also see that the fabric on the edge of the blouse has frayed away almost a ¼ inch. So here's what we're going to do. I started by taking out the stitching, and I just used my seam ripper and I carefully picked out the stitching to allow me to open up the binding in the affected area. So I've done that. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to get my pressing surface here, and I'm going to use two different fusibles to help me with this project. So what I'm going to do is, let me turn it so it's upside down. I think that'll be easier to show you guys. So if I pick the binding up, you can see we have this raveled edge right here. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is stabilize that. So I'm going to just use a small piece of SewkeysE Stay Tape, and SewkeysE really makes the best stay tape. This is what the packaging looks like. It's from Emma Seabrook. It's very easy to use and it's extremely lightweight. So I'm just going to use this white version of this stay tape, and the first thing I'm going to do is just cut off any big long threads. I'm not going to trim the frayed edge shorter. I'm just going to trim anything that's still attached to the binding, or something that's getting in the way of me laying it flat. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to lay it on the frayed edge so that it only extends past the frayed edge, maybe 1/8 inch. Because remember, we're going to have to stick it back in, and I don't want this stay tape to show. So I'm just going to overlap it so that it's extending about 1/8 inch into the unfrayed part of the edge here. So basically what I'm doing is I'm creating a new reinforced edge. Okay, so I am going to just fuse it a little at a time. I'm just going to use the tip of my iron. I'm fusing it to this fabric that's underneath as well. That's why I put that there, because I don't want to fuse it to my pressing surface directly, because then I can peel it off. So basically I'm just going to fuse it on, and I'm going to cut it to the exact length I need so I don't have any extra length here to get in my way. So I want it to lay flat like this, and I'm just fusing it to this little piece of fabric that I have laying here. Okay, so after it's fused, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just gently going to peel that white fabric away. So you can see what we have now is we have a stabilized edge. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to trim that stabilized edge to the top of the fray. So it's just going to leave a very small width of that knit stay tape. So you can see how it looks now. Okay, so you can see basically what I've done is I've just created a little bit of stability here where it was just all frayed and raveling. So that's the first step. The second step is you can see that the amount of fabric that I have to fit into the existing binding is longer because it has some very gentle gathers. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to gather up this fabric. That's going to be our next step. Because this is a really fine fabric, I've put in a size 10 Microtex needle, which is a super sharp needle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run 2 rows of gathering stitches pretty close together. The first row of gathering stitches is going to be right on the edge below the frayed section that I have fused to that knit stay tape. So I'm going to make my stitch length 3.0, and I'm just going to straight stitch along here just through the fabric of the neckline. And I'm going to go all the way to the other side where it's unattached. And then instead of using my thread snips, I'm going to lift my presser foot and pull it out so I have some tails to gather with. And then I'm going to do a second row, and this one's going to be slightly lower than the first row, maybe 1/8 of an inch away. Okay, so again, I'm just going to go right to the end. And again, I'm not going to use my thread snips. I'm going to pull it out so I have a tail. All right, so let's look at what we have now. Let's put it this way so you can see. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I am going to find my threads that I gathered this edge up with. Because they match the color of the fabric, they're a little bit tricky to find. And really, I'm only going to have to pull it up the slightest amount because you can see the tension on the thread almost gathered it enough by itself. So when I hold it like this, you can see that it almost matches now. So I'm going to just pull them a little bit on this side. So here's my, I'm going to pull them together. All right, so I've got both the gathering threads in this hand, and I'm just going to pull them so it's creating or picking up all of the extra ease. Okay, so I think that that's a pretty good match now. Like I said, it was just a little bit that we had to gather. Okay, so now you can see that that's going to fit in there pretty nicely. So our next step is I am going to take the binding and I'm going to open it up, and I think I'm even going to press it flat. All right, and I think what I'm going to do to make it easier to work on, I am going to pin that binding open as far as I can. So probably right here. This reminds me of when we dissected frogs in elementary school. I'm basically pinning the binding to my cut and press board here. And this will help me control what's happening. I can also pin the neckline away for a second. So I just want to make it so I can easily see what I'm doing here. Okay, so I've got those pins to hold down this section of binding. Now I'm going to take the piece of Fusible and I'm going to line it up. And this Fusible is the exact width of the binding, so I have to be really careful and center it. And then I'm just going to press it on like this. Making sure that I'm centering it. Okay, I'm going to let that cool for a second. You can probably unpin it. I can also clip some of these threads. All right, so now that it's cool, I'm going to peel off the paper backing. All right, so now I've got my binding ready to fold back in half, but before I fold it back in half, I'm going to stick the edge of the blouse into the center. So basically we're going to put that right back there. You know, we'll just make sure that those gathers are even. The edge is going to go back into the center, then I'm going to fold that back down like this. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it first, and then I'm going to just check and make sure that it's matching up front and back, but I'm basically folding that binding back into position. And because I have the knit stay tape in there, and I have the double-sided fusible, it's going to make it really easy to sew back together accurately once I get it tucked in. Okay, so you can see that we're fitting it right back in. And I've got these pins. Now I am using very fine glass head pins here. The beauty of a glass head pin is that you can iron over it because the little ball is not going to melt because it's glass. So I'm pinning through the binding front and back to make sure that it's agreeing, because if I can pin it front and back, then I know when I sew it's going to catch both as well. You can see on this side it's all back in there, and you can see from the inside it's all back in. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just gently going to press it, and that's going to hold all the layers together, and then we can remove the pins. And I'm just patting with my iron. Notice I am not rubbing anything, I am just patting. The pins are still there for the most part. Let's look at it from this side. I'm going to remove the pins. And it should stay together fairly nicely because I have that fusible in there, but you can see that's looking pretty good. You can see a tiny bit of the white stay tape there, but this is on the inside, so it's not going to matter. On the right side of it, I don't see it at all. Okay, so our next step is to sew it back into place. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew from the right side of the garment, and I'm literally going to start where I can see the original stitching is still there. So I'm going to overlap my original stitching. I'm going to keep that 3.0 stitch length, and I'm just going to back tack. I'm just going to sew it right back together here. Sewing pretty close to that edge of the folded binding, and I'm going to go past where I took it apart, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out and look at it, and I'm going to pull on it to see if it's going to come undone again. So you can see I'm pulling on it all the way across. It's going nowhere. So I think we've made a successful repair. Okay, so to finish up, all I'm going to do is remove my basting stitching, and the one underneath the repair will pull right out, and then the one that's actually in the repair or underneath, I'll just clip that thread. But basically you can see I've removed the threads, and we have a lovely repaired blouse. So I'm just going to cut these. Alright, my needle left some holes where I basted, so let's just give it some steam to see if they close. So I'm just going to give this a little steam. I'm just going to give this a little steamo here. All right, so you can see we have a completely repaired neckline. All right, so that's how you repair a tear in a neckline that's finished with a binding. So like sometimes in the factory, the edge of the fabric will be a little bit close and not inserted all the way into the binding, and it can tear in the wash or just come out. So if you have a neckline that's escaped its binding, that's how you fix it. If you have any questions or comments, please post those below and I will help you. I will be having FabFit Friday this week, so I will see you this Friday. I apologize, last Friday I was teaching for the virtual quilt festival at 1 o'clock, so I did not have FabFit Friday, but there will be a FabFit Friday this week, so I hope you'll join me at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day.